This year, what I've been looking at is the relationship between GDP and employment. And the reason for that is that what I try and do is based on the level of employment and the number of hours worked, do a nowcast for what is happening in the quarter. Now, to do that, of course, we need 3 months of data, the 3 months of data for hours worked and employment that's in the quarter we're trying to estimate. And we haven't got that yet for the third quarter. We've got 2 months. But what I want to talk about today is what we've learned from those 2 months of data to enable us to at least attempt to estimate what the effect of the current shutdowns in New South Wales and Victoria are on GDP for the quarter. And that gives us a feel for where we might be going over the full year and next year. But of course, it'll be in a month's time when I've got the 3 months of data that I'll be able to give a solid estimate for what I think GDP actually did. It's important to understand the Australian economic achievement. Most economic students, when they start in first year, is told that Australia is a small, open economy. As a matter of fact, it's a bloody large economy. And you can see that in terms of how we're listed relative to other countries in the world. The United Nations tells us that there's 213 economies in the world which are members of the United Nations. And right now, in terms of the 2021 data, we rate number 13. And that is just behind Russia, which has been a hell of a big country for a long time, which is at number 11, and Brazil, and ahead of Spain, which is number 14. You know, Spain's contribution to world civilization is considerable. When I looked at these numbers, I mused what would happen to the world if as many people spoke like Australians with an Australian accent as speak Spanish. But that number 13 on the UN list for world economies compares, like I say, to a total number of 213. The bottom 20 are, interestingly enough, mostly islands either in the Caribbean or somewhere in the Pacific. But when we look at the numbers for employment and hours worked behind the Australian economic achievement, they're actually pretty big. In June, there was 13.165 million people employed in Australia, which is an awful lot. And they worked 1.78 billion hours. Now, then we had the beginning of the shutdowns, and in August, that number dropped from the number of people employed dropped from 13.165 million to 13.023 billion. So we lost about 140,000 jobs. And of course, that reduces GDP for the quarter. And the other thing that happened was that hours worked dropped from 1.78 billion to 1.71 billion in August. But like I say, we need September as well to give us a proper estimate. Now, what we think is the result of that is that the Australian economy, which, by the way, is each quarter Australia produces $250 billion in output. So in the June quarter, we produced $505 billion, or $500 billion in output. We produced $2 trillion in output every year in Australian dollar terms, and therefore we're producing about 1.45 billion US dollars. Again, well, this is a hell of a big economy, and it's a very considerable achievement. So we estimate that on the decline in employment and hours worked that we've got so far for July and August, that GDP in the third quarter dropped from 505 billion to 500 billion, and that's a drop so far of 0.9%. Now, the RBA estimates that the negative effect of the shutdowns is a 2% drop in GDP, but if we include where growth would have been for the quarter, which is probably 0.7, and the minus 0.9, then what we've got actually is a drop in output of about 1.5%, just in, you know, with the growth we would have been relative to the loss. So we don't know exactly what that 2% of GDP that the RBA is talking about means, but we'll know more precisely when we get to the end of the quarter. But the important thing is both the RBA believes, and I certainly believe in the outlooks that I've put out, that the experience we've had before will be repeated, that when the economy reopens, we'll get all of that growth back that we've lost and more. And so what we have next year is a pretty dramatic acceleration of the economy. I said in a piece I put out yesterday that it'll be 5% or better with this shutdown, and that's where I think we're going. And but that level of output that we had in the June quarter was the highest level of economic output the Australian economy has ever achieved in all of its history. But next year we're going to have even higher numbers, and that's no small thing that the Australian economy is doing.